afternoon from the sunny and warm Copenhagen. Welcome to the webinar Flexibility Services in the Zero-Emission Smart Grid, Market Models, Regulations, Actors and Technologies, hosted by the UNEP-DTU Partnership. My name is Thibault. I'm working as a Program Associate at UNEP-DTU, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. A couple of things before we move to the main content of the webinar. This webinar is going to be about 2 hours long, including time for Q&A at the end. In case you cannot stay until the end or want to get back to our presentations, all the materials and the recording of the whole webinar will be available online in a few days. Before we start discussing about today's webinar, I would like to inform you, our attendees, that we comply with the General Data Protection Act, also known as GDPR. This means that your personal data, such as name, email, workplace, is safely processed and stored, and all of your rights pursuant to the GDPR are respected. You have full access to the data being processed about you, and at any time, you can request that inaccurate data be deleted or rectified. For access or further information, please contact with the people that are presented here. I would like to briefly introduce the speakers of today's webinar. Simon is a senior researcher at UNEP-DTU Partnership. He holds a PhD in geography from the University of Copenhagen. He does research in sustainable energy, climate change, circular bioeconomy, and agri-food systems in the Scandinavian and African regions. Helle is the managing director of the Danish Intelligent Energy Alliance. Helle has more than 25 years experience within advocacy towards policymakers and other stakeholders. Asger is a senior project manager at Center Denmark and a researcher at the Technical University of Denmark. He holds a PhD in computer science with a focus on mitigating cyber failures in smart energy systems. Klaus is a senior respect advisor and scientist at the Center for Innovation Systems and Policy at the Austrian Institute of Technology in Vienna. He holds a doctoral degree in economics and has an industry background as electrical engineer. Joni is a researcher and project coordinator at the Research Institutes of Sweden. She works in the fields of electricity system analysis, smart grids, energy markets, regulatory frameworks, and sector integration. Claire is an assistant professor at the Technical University of Denmark in energy economics and system analysis. She is an energy economist, an expert in energy policy and regulation, sector coupling, and renewable energy integration. Anna holds the chair of Sustainable Innovation and Transitions at the Eindhoven University of Technology. Anna is a founding member of the Sustainability Transitions Research Network, STRN. And finally, Klaus is CEO at Nordic Energy Research, a regional platform for cooperative energy research and policy development under the auspices of the Nordic Council of Ministers. Klaus has a PhD in economics from the University of Copenhagen. Finally, I would like to inform you that you can send us your questions during the presentations using the dedicated icon, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can at the end. Please do not forget to mention the name of the panelist that the question is for. I will now give the floor to Simon, our first speaker, and hope you enjoy this UNEP-DTU webinar. Simon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'll just give you a little bit of project background and a preliminary framework for understanding these flexibility services. I will first give actually the word to Klaus Cobescu to introduce the ISGAN program and the Annex 7, which is part of the ISGAN program. So Klaus. Okay, let me wait for Klaus, or just introduce ISGAN while we're waiting for Klaus Cobescu to chip in here. So the International Smart Grid Action Network is a collaboration program under the International Energy Agency. It's a platform to develop and exchange knowledge and expertise on smarter and cleaner and more flexible electricity grids, the so-called smart grids. So it's more or less, and the ISGAN has 5 areas of work: policies and standards, regulation, finance and business models, technology system development, workforce skills and knowledge, users and consumer engagement, And it has 9 annexes. Actually, we only see 8 here, but we have different annexes working on different topics. And the one annex that is co-hosting the webinar today is Annex 7, called Smart Grids Transition. The ISGAN has 26 contracting parties worldwide in almost every continent of the world. So the ISGAN Annex 7 focuses on the transitions of the smart grids, looking at institutional change and using the broad transition management framework. It is the aim is to spark off international transdisciplinary research in different social sciences. It is wants to address social needs, governance, regulation, and human behavior, and to support policymakers in the field of smart grids by looking at longer-term energy transition pathways for the smart grids. The Annex produces publications, events, and has a very nice LinkedIn page. And you can see the links to our website and the LinkedIn page here. Under the Annex 7, we have a special Danish project funded by the Danish Energy Agency the last 5 years or so. It's a dissemination project, and it is the project that is hosting this webinar. We've had 4 seminars/webinars during the last 4 years that you can see the titles here. And today we have the last webinar in the project cycle, called Flexibility Service in a Zero-Emission Smart Grid. We have produced a brief in the 2017 called Smart Grid Transition System Solutions and Consumer Behavior that you can download on the link shown here. And we, in relation to this webinar and to the end of this project cycle, we will publish another brief on flexibility services in the integrated electricity system. And that will come out July this year. We also participate in different international ISGAN Annex 7 activities, research and dissemination activities. Today's topics, you have probably seen the program, but let me just quickly outline the topics and presentations for today. We will first hear about market models and regulatory change for flexibility service in local grids with a focus on Denmark. Then we'll hear about the digital tools and data platforms supporting flexibility. Then we will hear about the so-called regulatory sandbox experiments, that is, building institutions, policies, and regulations for flexibility services. Then we have a presentation from Sweden called Unlocking Flexibility in Local Networks that will both look at market models and technologies. And it will be followed by a presentation on smart integration of data centers. And the final presentation will be about the roles and aspirations of community-based virtual power plants or energy communities, I believe based on European experiences. After the Q&A session, we'll then have a panel discussion where we'll discuss the broad themes of this webinar, new models, actors, and technologies for flexibility services. Finally, I would just like to show you a framework that we have developed up to this webinar, and it's a preliminary framework, but it's a framework where we try to look at how flexibilities can evolve and how they can be understood in a transitions perspective. And on the left-hand side, we have what we call the social technical system of energy production, consumption, and distribution, and so on, composed of different actors in the energy system, including firms, regulators, citizens, energy communities, and so on. We have the energy and ICT technologies and assets. And then we have the broad range of institutions and social practices that are shaping and being shaped by technologies and actors. That includes markets, more formal institutions such as laws and regulations and policies, as well as partnerships, networks, informal rules, and so on. And this system then sort of produces flexibility services, or are meant to produce flexibility services locally in the different distribution grids. But this system also has to take account of the preconditions that exist in different areas. And it also, and the production of these, or the generation of these flexibilities also depend on experimentation. And Klaus Kubescu, my colleague, will come back to that topic later. So this is an attempt to sort of to connect these different topics of the webinar today into one framework. We'll also use this framework in the smart grid brief that we will send out in July. So that's all for me now. Thank you very much.
Well, my name is Helle Jula Vadona, and I am working or heading the Danish Intelligent Energy Alliance. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak on our the Danish regulatory experiences on flexibility development and having a particular focus on the local grid. Just to start, I will briefly tell about who we are and then what drives the regulation, the energy system development, then move into the regulatory framework, the market model 3.0, and finally, very briefly look into market developments and flexibility services. We have about 80 members within energy utilities, also water utilities and suppliers, solution providers, hardware technologies, as well as software and flexibility service developers, consultancies, municipalities, research institutions, and finance. And they all gather in our alliance because they have a particular interest in the energy system transition and the way this can happen only cost effectively by integrating energy systems and integration with the sector coupling issue, where flexibility in the consumption end becomes very important. And what you see here is the Sankey diagram of where we are in Denmark in our energy system today, 2019, and where we want to be in 2030 with the ambitious reduction target of reducing CO2 emissions or CO2 equivalent emissions with 70% by 2030. And what you see is not only that we will double almost the share of renewable energy in our system, but more than half our fossil fuels in the system. This means that energy efficiency will play a significant role, and this will happen due to technologies that use electricity in a more efficient way, such as heat pumps and electric vehicles. So what this diagram also shows is that things become more complex when you need to have renewable energy into all sorts of usage, household, business, and transport. Then the sector coupling becomes significant, and in order to balance the energy system, when you cannot control the significant share of wind and solar power that will come into the system because it's the cheaper way of transition to a green production, it will mean that the infrastructure will carry much more energy, 2-3 times more electricity will have to run through the grid and enter into a consumption that, if it is not only based on renewable energy, but also controllable, monitorable, then you cannot balance this system. This is a balance where digitalization means that only leading on digitalization will enable us to lead on a green transition, because we need to be able to balance the energy system not only 24/7, but in every second of the system. So therefore, flexibility is crucial. very soon the Energy Authority will release reports showing that there is an effect deficiency that is increasing and is significant by 2030 because all the thermal power plants are closing down. So we really need a good framework to make flexibility on the consumption side work, and the digitalization is fundamental to this. Fortunately, we've been well on track for developing a better framework for conditions for demand response. This is a picture of the most recent initiatives within the last 3 years, where the energy agreement in 2018 listed that Denmark should be the most integrated market-based and flexible energy system in Europe. And a decision was made on making a market model 3.0 as part of that energy agreement. Alongside that came the Clean Energy Package, finalized in December 2018 and implemented in national law by the turn of this year, December 2020. We had a new electricity regulation with a number of elements that means a lot to the flexibility market, and especially to the requirement that DSOs in a transparent and standardized way demand flexibility. Alongside that, the Danish Energy Association has been working on new tariff models, and with the electricity regulation, it was also decided to have geographical differentiation of tariffs. On top of that comes a climate agreement with support schemes that enhance the electrification. So the volume of potential flexibility increases within heating, for instance, because more heat pumps are going into the district heating as well as to the individual heating. And on top of that comes a Green Deal in the EU with a sector integration strategy that also will push us forward. Now, digging into what is possible today and what will become possible within the next year or so in the Danish context, we have been working on developing aggregator models ever since what we called Market Model 2.0, which was an initiative of the Danish TSO Energinet, where they had a report in 2014 and started a number of working groups, including one on aggregator models, where Energinet, together with the Danish Energy Association and the Intelligent Energy Alliance and the Danish industry, developed further on the models. Now, the current model, the model of today, is the well-known, where the aggregator, for instance, the balanced responsible party, is a role. This is where we have come furthest in Denmark, where boilers, for instance, are activated in district heating. But during the time since 2017, where this report with the 3 models was released and recommended, a model where the frequency stabilization can be sold into the TSO markets for balancing services without having a balanced responsible party, because the energy amounts are so small, has also been decided upon. That was decided upon long time ago, but finalized, the approval was finalized last year in February. Model 2 and 3, actually initially Model 3 was the model that we had. We had it in the sense that a serial meter behind the main meter of the DSO has been something that was possible ever since 2008 or so. The serial meeting actually builds on an EV company, Better Place, way back. But this serial meter was something that commercial players found very expensive and also time-consuming to establish. Very expensive in terms of having it put on small consumption units. So we are now developing further on Model 3, and the DSO and Energinet have a common committee that has decided on developing further on this model, so that the already existing meters in heat pumps and EVs and what have you can be utilized to build the customer and to monitor the system, but still needs to be validated by the DSO in order to be used for billing behind the main meter, which is still the DSO's main meter, and the DSO's obligation is to validate those data before they go into the data hub. This is under development. Another thing that was actually not seen as very relevant back in 2017 is Model 2, where supplier of flexibility that do not want to supply electricity should have that option. But the EU Electricity Directive requires that the independent aggregator is implemented through a model with an aggregator that can deliver flexibility with no supply of energy. So ISGAN is tasked to develop this model, and we have agreed or recommended that it is developed and that you ensure that the imbalances created by the aggregator is corrected, so that you don't have a financial flow or money flow, but ISGAN will correct the balances so that there isn't a imbalance cost to the balance responsible party raised by the aggregator's activity. And this is underway. There are workshops on Monday and in September or October with ISGAN that will finalize this model. This all adds to the need for making it cheaper to activate smaller units of flexibility. And really looking at the new electricity law and the 11 executive orders that accompany this law that was decided or finalized around Christmas, there are many elements relevant for flexibility and aggregators. And in particular, with the headline I have on flexibility services in local grid, the need to develop DSO guidelines on how to demand flexibility in the grid is underway. We have the Danish Energy Association developing a guideline, and it will go into a hearing process before the summer. What we are concerned or want to see happening in this guideline is that it is transparent and easy to understand, easy to use, that it links to some length to the TSO market, so that the kind of product description you have isn't completely different from the balancing services. And we think that it is important simply to get started. So we have asked the Energy Authority for support schemes that can support commercial players in this field in a starting point, simply to get the market going. What we also have discussed is that it is important that the kind of product that is demanded doesn't exclude particular assets. So if you have a lot of requirements on being accessible for longer terms, then you will risk to exclude smaller units like heat pumps and EVs. All that is happening right now and will fall into place during this year. Also, what is happening is that the economic regulation of DSOs is under development, and we hope to see a new piece of regulation that will ensure that the incentive for a DSO to demand flexibility isn't punished. Today, the regulation is such that if the DSO invests in hardware, the DSO comes better out in a benchmark compared to a colleague that invests in flexibility services. We need to change what is called the income framework regulation, indtægtsrammeregulering, in order to treat this fairly. We also need to change the regulation so that the incentive to use a tariff instrument versus using flexibility services has the equal impact on the DSO. Today, the regulation favors using a tariff instrument rather than demanding flexibility services. We've talked already about developing aggregator models, but a final element that could have an impact on this market is the energy community. So it's local energy communities, renewable energy communities, or consumption energy communities that could move into a role where it could drive local engagement. We know from the preliminary research that or evaluation of cases in Europe that it is the local engagement and the green engagement that is the driver and not the economic benefits. Our concern is that you need to treat energy communities fairly, but you also need not to punish aggregators using or doing more or less the same thing, namely grouping consumption in aggregated portfolio. So there will be a new tariff model for energy communities, and we are following this issue, and particularly also following the issue that we hear that across Europe, flexibility as an element of an energy community, flexibility towards the grid, hasn't taken the role that was the intention in the directive. So there is a development there to pursue further. Finally, the market model 3.0 is also about a lot of other elements and very important elements, because one thing is that you want to lower the barriers for commercial players like aggregators. But if the actual asset owner isn't aware of how he or she can act, then you still don't have a good market development. And the market model 3.0 is looking into the fact that all players should be enabled to contribute with flexibility, that the flexible energy market should contribute to balancing the energy system, and that the flexibility energy market also should contribute to an effective infrastructure investment, that is postponement of investment by using flexibility, that the economic regulation of monopolies, that is DSOs and TSOs, should enhance their usage of flexibility market, and that we should have a forward-looking electricity market based on the consultancy of people with knowledge about flexibility. So some very overall issues that will be addressed when the report is and its recommendation is presented or publicized very soon. Our concern is that we need to see this market model 3.0 push the TSO to make scenarios about how much will the system require by 2030, by 2035, 2040, in order for the energy system to balance. So what kind of demand for flexibility do we foresee? And can we put some sort of value onto it? We know, and that's a fact, that with intermittent resources, you will have more fluctuation in spot prices. So the insurance part, being able to monitor your assets to avoid flexibility, the value of that insurance will for sure increase. But what is the value of then moving your consumption or production to other hours? We need to have a market price for that in order for investments to be incentivized correctly. And here, the district heating and the individual heat pumps, we see playing a crucial role. We also need to be better at analyzing what the consequences of new market design and product design by the TSO on a European level will have in terms of impact on flexibility markets. We see sometimes a raising of bid sizes, and that will damage the flexibility market. So a lot of issues will have to fall into place here due to the market model 3.0. An element that isn't part of market model 3.0, but where a lot of things are going on with a huge impact on local flexibility, is the grid development. And it has been decided to make a time of use tariff, but it has also been decided to enhance that time of use, so that using the grid in peak hours will be more expensive and using it during the night will be less expensive. This is already decided, and the proposal has been submitted by the Danish Energy Association. Then it needs to be submitted by every DSO and approved by the Energy Authority. It has also been decided that geographical differentiation should be enabled, not only for feed-in, that is feed-in of production of renewable energy today isn't paying for the grid usage. that will change, but from our perspective, we need also to see geographical differentiation from the consumption side. In ISGAN, it has a full package of tariff elements, grid and system tariff. That is under review as well this year. And then so far, the TSO have put their tariff on end users, even though that the electron wasn't traveling all the way through the grid. Now, the future model will be such that the TSO will put their grid tariff on the consumption in the TSO grid and the DSO. And then the DSO can enhance the DSO grid towards the end consumer by a markup, for instance. That model is under development. And the graph here that I haven't translated, apologies for that, shows the distribution impact on C customers, which are paying more than A and B customers. They are at the final end, so it's households, it's you and me, basically. And as you can see, still, of course, there's VAT, but the tariff still accounts for some part of the price, but not as much as the electricity price and other elements. So it's a complex price incentive. However, to just indicate where the flexibility market needs to go, clearly so far, monitoring of use or monitoring of energy use, the value of that has been the value from energy savings, and that still means a lot. But what we have to have going forward in order for our system to balance and in order for not energy savings as much as CO2 savings to be in focus is a combined optimization. And this is simply because the spot price will vary much more due to more wind and solar in our power production. And this means that if you cannot avoid these peaks, and this is just one example from September last year, due to planned pullout of thermal power plants, but then all of a sudden also a disconnect on interconnectors to other countries, the price peaked, as you can see, at 8 o'clock on the 21st September. Those kind of things will happen much more often. And this you need to be able, in combination with your energy optimization, to look for. So this is where the money goes. And this is also something that, for instance, heat pumps and district heating need to monitor often. So the whole integration of optimizing heat system and optimizing towards the electricity market becomes increasingly important. The grid tariff is also of huge importance. When you have the time of use tariff on the C customer, you can see here that this is a average heat pump, and 30% of the individual heat pump's consumption today is during the winter peak. So being able to move away from some of those hours will have an impact on the total business case. We are moving ahead, and this is one of my final slides. It's actually the final slide. We have developed our market in Denmark, but as you can see, we are not those who have come furthest. Clearly, the UK, due to its particular issues, has come much further, and those with much nuclear power who has never been able to control production from the production side, been able to control, has much more experience in activating demand side flexibility. So we need to look more carefully into how can we actually engage customer, and this is actually the real barrier and the real difficult part looking forward in the Danish market as well as elsewhere. Thank you. Those were my words.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about a bit about Center Denmark, FED project in general, and why digitalization in the energy sector is important, and how we see it from Center Denmark perspective. And I'll share with you some of the digital platform ecosystem that we already have, and some use cases that we have tried and tested as part of FED project. and then I'll conclude the presentation. So we are Center Denmark. Center Denmark is a Danish National Center for Research and Development and test and demonstration, with a focus on data intelligence and integrated energy systems. So our aim is to, by providing the energy platforms, enable flexibility and facilitate that. In a nutshell, we are a digital innovation hub center and also a digital platform provider by Iranet Smart Energy Systems. We also have access or provide many living labs and test beds as part of Center Denmark. We are completely independent and non-profit organization. Our board of directors are some of the largest universities in Denmark, including DTU, STU, Aalborg, and Aarhus, but also some DSOs and the main TSO in Denmark, Energinet. And as I said, we are fully independent and non-profit, but that doesn't mean that we don't take any commercial activities. It just means whatever we earn will be spent within the center. And when it comes to Flexible Energy Denmark, so this is a project funded by Innovation Fund Denmark. It's a grant solution project. The idea there is that FED would develop tools and solutions based on big data and AI to activate flexibility at all layers of the systems. And these systems will be tried and tested in a real living labs. So the way so this is sort of an overview of the project. We start with having some living labs. So these are the real living labs, varying in types from residential to commercial and some DSOs. We get the data into the sort of another work package, which is sort of a data lake. And then based on the data that we receive from the living lab, we develop some tools. So these tools are usually coming from the commercial partner or research partners within the project. This is all to provide some solutions. So the solutions are, for example, it's the bigger question: how do we provide flexibility in the local grid? And to answer that, of course, you need the whole chain of events. So it's not just one party. And this happens in a loop. And then, of course, what we have in the left is also the living labs that I mentioned. So these living labs are the ones who are sort of providing the data to the project. And then we have the partners and the universities which are formulating this information and data into knowledge and then share it back with them. So we have this sort of validation verification by use. So there is a lot, it's agile development that we have been trying for the last 2 years. I mean, there is a lot of back and forth, a lot of practical issues, but nevertheless, this is how we do things here in this project. As you see, based on what I showed, I mean, what we have at least found out was that energy systems are complex, so it's not so easy to tackle. Once you look at it as a whole, when it comes to deployment of digital solution, you realize the complexity, and this is because these are all system of systems, so and highly interdependent, meaning that you are working with one partner, but the gadget, the equipment, the software that they rely on belongs to 2-3 different. So even if you want to access to some servers, some sensors, you need to take multiple routes, multiple points to get to what you want to, and then it's not always straightforward. And in fact, we are just in the transition to become smart energy systems. So I put a bit of some emphasis on the word smart because, of course, smart means different things to different people, different depending on your background. But to us, smart means being able to automate things so that things are run automatically. We just you have a full system. So we call this smart. So just having a smart meter at home doesn't qualify that, at least in our case. So we just a smart meter. But also when we talk about the smart energy system as the way I described, then of course you rely heavily on real-time data and historical data to be available for your operation. And then once you have all these, then you need to make sure that all the systems are interoperable, and then they talk together, they can operate together. If you are providing flexibility, you need to know who your aggregator is. Do they have the right setup? Do they have the right digital infrastructure? These are all have their own requirements. They have their own technology barriers, and yeah, I'm not going to get into that, but we have a lot to get to the final point here. So what do we, from Center Denmark, of course, our vision is to accelerate this green transition towards 100% renewable through digitalization, of course, in Denmark and by sector coupling. And our mission is to be able to help and use this renewable energy production capacity in full by demand response and avoid the down regulation. Of course, this means that if we do that, we would be able to save some investment in infrastructure, because we are able to use the data, the information that we have. And also, another point is because, at least because I'm talking about Flexible Energy Denmark, and in the same with many other research projects, we would like to bring this platform for continuity of the research. So we have many interesting model solution algorithms developed as part of this project, and many others. It would be nice that we have a place where we can use it as a platform to use those tools as well. So once, for example, this project FED has finished, we should be able to use some of the algorithm or research output, not just in terms of the publications, but the actual tools, and then we can share it with others. And of course, it would put us, at least in Denmark, in a good position to be digitally competences within this sector across Europe. So if we look at here, what we see is, of course, there is a lot of talk now about sector coupling, but in order to do that, digitalization is a key. You need to have, of course, you need to have the services for that. So the services mean that you need to have a trusted data sharing platform with 24/7 access, and not only one directional, but in fact bi-directional. Sometimes you need to test and demonstrate your ideas before you deploy it in large scales, and this is one way that probably we in Center Denmark would be able to have. We also provide this digital innovation incubator for knowledge transfer. So now what we have in Frisia is some of the businesses also sitting with us that are using or are in the same, they have the same goal, but more energy sector based, are sitting with us, and we kind of have ongoing discussions on how to sometimes develop these tools and solutions together. Now, in a nutshell, what we try to do as Center Denmark is to promote data-driven innovations for green transition. So instead of increasing investment, let's focus on the data-driven solutions. And our role is, of course, to, and we have been doing that, develop infrastructures to host the data lake. We are kind of providing a data market place for our partners. So we get data from many living labs and sharing it with others. We are also hosting some of the tools and solutions, and we also have this Unilab DK, which is a shared umbrella of some of the companies or living labs they want to participate in the project. So having said that, this is sort of the way we have in the back end. So I don't want to go so much in details, but right now we have some static data, some stream data, and some batch data, and we get them through different things. So for instance, in terms of data, we get them, we ingest them in our systems, then we store them depending on where we get the data from, what are the sources and the different solutions, from Azure to DigitalOcean, we use a lot of different also vendors out there. Then we use this data for computation. Of course, when I say we, so at some part, these are the researchers that are collaborating with us. And then at the end, we have the end users. So the end users are able to interact with our system. So those are those who are part of this system. So now, or soon we will have this capability that the citizen would be able to log in with their name IDs and provide their data, and then we would be able to use it for research and development. And of course, all these services are orchestrated using different services. Currently, we at least these are some of the cases that we have. We are getting data from different, let's say, suppliers of data to us, but these are real-time, real data from their assets that we get. We process it in our end, and then the university partners have access to the same data. So instead of each university partner go one-to-one to them, we have this centralized platform where they can ask what they need. But what is quite interesting for us that we have noticed, maybe this is quite, at least maybe others have experienced it, because and as part of Center Denmark, we kind of had to have these one-to-one interactions with our data providers. We have realized that actually at the end, some of our partners, so the readiness level is it's totally different. You have some partners that are very advanced in their solution, and others are still, following some of the technologies in late 90s or early 2000s. And that makes it quite interesting, because when it comes to sector coupling, you need all of them. And then this readiness level is quite important. So to bring everyone to the same speed. Otherwise, I mean, you may have some companies which are there, but collectively you need most of them. And also the role of digital platform providers, so organization like ours, like Center Denmark, because you need to have a trusted parties where you can share your data, you can send your data to, and then you are sure that they comply with the regulation, with the GDPR, and also secure setup as well. And then what we have noticed that sometimes this could be a barrier, some of these internal requirements by partners in how to share data, where to send it, or who to share it afterward. So to conclude this presentation, this is what we have kind of learned from the FED project, that actually you need to have a secure and reliable access to information to enable these flexibilities. So you need the right setup. And once you have the right setup, of course, you also need to have the living lab providers, and so the real living lab, so that you can test your solution. And also, I think it's quite important to acknowledge that these digital platform providers can be one of the interfaces between the market and the end users. Of course, if you think of the household level, they cannot themselves participate in the market. So yes, you have the aggregators, but also these digital platforms are also quite important in this value chain. And since we are again a non-profit organization, we really emphasize on sharing the knowledge with others and our findings. And that's it from me. I'll be happy to take any question at the end if you have. Thank you very much.
Great. So thank you for the opportunity to talk. And as already introduced, I'm working for ISGAN in the Annex 7 on smart grid transition. What we are doing now is look at the actors and institutions which are or may be involved in flexibility services from a long-term perspective. I will briefly talk about introduce socio-technical transition concept, then ask the question flexibility for whom, by whom, and give you a short insight on the actual developments in regulatory sandbox experimenting. For our work in Annex 7, and Simon already presented a similar slide here, the long-term transition of socio-technical systems and future sustainable energy systems are at our focus. A future energy system which, from what we know, will be a completely different one. With this in mind, it is important to distinguish between three components or dimensions, which are those actors, technologies, and institutions. In ISGAN, very often technology is too much in the focus, and less focus is on actors and institutions. And regulations as the topic here being the key formal institution, among others. If experimenting with new flexibility solutions or services and or regulations, all three components of the socio-technical system need to be taken into account, and also that changes will take place in all three dimensions, no matter what. Managing energy transition is not only a matter of establishing a new system, but also to deal with the barriers encountered through the resistance of change of the old system. So there is something that we have to take into account. So here in the slide, you see the upward S-curve starts with experimentation and goes into institutionalization, stabilization of a new energy system. Actually, conventional experimenting or piloting is something that you see here on the very beginning. What we're talking about is experimenting towards institutionalization of a new regime. So for whom? Flexibility for whom, by whom. Managing energy transition is not only a matter of establishing a new system, but also to deal with the barriers encountered through the resistance of change of the old system. And so looking at the actors, we always distinguish between incumbent actors and new actors. The incumbent actors in the electricity regime, and those are the ones who would be happy to receive also mainly those flexibility services are the DSOs, the balancing responsible parties, utilities, suppliers, market institutions can make a business out of it, energy providers as well, and end users are always somewhere in between. New actors, and we have heard this in the first presentation, aggregators who are also want to make a business from flexibility services, but also storage providers and regime actors from other energy vectors increasingly play a role also for the electricity regime. And last but not least, and that's what in the discussions often is considered as given, is that people are asked to be active local grid users or be in energy communities, and thus as such provide services to others. What we also have to take into account and ask which markets are we talking about, if we are at all talking about markets. If we want to talk about flexibility markets, we have to become clear and communicate well what we are talking about. Which of the many markets are we talking about? And you see here a slide from a colleague of ours, Regine Bellon, with colleagues who tried to outline different functional markets. So if you want to talk about what we later want to talk about, regulatory piloting, regulatory sandboxes, regulatory experimenting as such, you explicitly have to be clear about where we are. So now coming to the regulatory sandbox, fashionable term now, we tend to use the term regulatory experimenting as an umbrella term. So what is it about? Regulatory experiments can be defined as a means to deliberately deviate from the current regulatory framework to try out new or different rules in a real-world setting. They can complement conventional approaches of piloting technological solutions and help to make sure that regulation facilitates innovation. We have two different kinds of regulatory experiments. Basically, the first is regulatory sandboxes, regulatory experiments that provide a framework for socio-technical experiments. That means experiments with new technologies, business cases, and social innovation. And of course, also new actors can be potentially involved. The other form of regulatory experimenting that is increasingly getting important is to try out new pieces of regulation, innovative regulation, effective for all actors in a dedicated area over a dedicated time. Then the lawmaker and regulatory bodies can experiment from their perspective. Who profits from such regulatory experimenting? We have identified and worked with actors in our projects and actor groups such as innovators and researchers who want to make a step to experimenting in a real world context, and that also links up to the second presentation, to the previous one. But as I already started to mention, the regulatory bodies and energy market commissions, as well as ministries and agencies, legislators, lawmakers are equally important, or in some cases even more important. So regulatory bodies in charge of granting exemptions, who, for example, want to learn about new tariff models or how to serve the needs of the future consumer, which is interestingly and slowly coming up. For example, Ofgem, the regulator in the UK, is also entitled to serve the future consumers and not only, as in most other countries, the current consumers. Ministries and agencies in charge of accelerating energy transition, who, for example, want to learn what works and want to better understand innovation barriers, and legislators and lawmakers in charge of providing legal framework conditions for the energy transition, who, for example, want to understand and anticipate implications of laws prior to its permanent implementation. To give you a brief example, Schoonship in Amsterdam was a project that was granted an exemption in the Netherlands. It's an example meant actually in this case to avoid the need for additional flexibility services to TSO. So 105 inhabitants have 500 solar panels, 30 heat pumps, and the house owners agreed to have a limited capacity for connecting to the grid, which helps TSO to not having to install a new transformer. And it was a technological project aiming to optimize the generation, the use and storage of energy within limits of the guaranteed capacity. That means instead of, for example, 60 kilowatt peak, if 30 households are involved and directly connected together, they limit themselves to a lower amount. So altogether, 400 kilowatt peak instead of 480 kilowatt peak for the whole set of households. The other interesting example is from Italy. The Italian regulator is very active in setting up new experiments. So here you can see a lot of experiments that have already been set up in project form on smart grids, on wind integration, smart metering, demand response, e-mobility. And as I already mentioned, now they are going into pilot regulation, so they really want to provide a real-world context for everybody within a certain area. Okay, to come to a conclusion, what are the challenges with regulator experimenting? Experiments need to have a clear goal. There need to be a clear test case. There need to be a hypothesis that you aim for to test, and long preparations might be needed. There need to be a long-term vision and orchestration of future energy system. Transition pathways have to be clear, and a role of the smart electricity grid in the whole system has to be clear. Otherwise, those actors, lawmakers, regulatory bodies are not able to learn, and the system transition is not supported. A very important element is learning and to have an evaluation strategy. Otherwise, the coordinated efforts will not be successful. And most important, the most hard challenge is that you have to have lawmakers and regulatory bodies on board, but they face also different barriers, like people's risk attitude at the institutions, at the ministries, and particularly at the regulatory bodies, is not very innovation oriented, and there has to be, even for experimenting, a legal basis, which is also hard to get. To give you an example, in Austria, we now have an established program for regulatory experimenting, but we're now waiting for 2 years to get the legal basis for the regulatory body to grant an exemption on tariffs. If you want to learn more about regulatory experimenting, we have had several webinars. This is still from 2 years ago, the webinar. There was a webinar last week, and on our website you certainly find the link in a few weeks or days. And we also published a smart grid case study, a case book on regulatory approaches, which will also be updated over the summer. And then you can also read more about actual cases in the different countries. Yeah, so here's the link to it. And thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Joni Rossi. I'm a researcher at the Electric Power Systems Unit of RISE, the Research Institutes of Sweden. And my presentation today will be about some learnings that we had from 2 Horizon projects, and what we learned on unlocking flexibility in local networks. Just a few words before I start. I want to mention also, I'm very happy I got this invitation from the ISGAN Annex 7, and I'm myself very much involved in ISGAN in another annex. I'm the operating agent for Annex 6 on transmission and distribution systems. This is indeed an annex that focuses much more on the technology and the application of advanced technologies and how they can support the member states of ISGAN in reaching their clean energy and climate goals. But it's important also to understand that we see the electricity networks as key enablers for the energy transition, both at the transmission level, when you think, for example, about the one system vision of ENSOE, as at the local level, and then the relationship with the empowerment of the consumers. So my presentation today will be focusing more on the distribution level, the local level, and on two projects that I'm involved in from RISE, so they don't fall under the ISGAN Annex 6. First project is United Grid, and actually I'm very happy because we are finalizing this project this week. And this project focuses mostly on providing cyber-physical solution for the grid, so a toolbox and a cross-platform that support the DSO in providing services and in the future also to unlock flexibility on the grid. And then the FlexiGrid project continues a bit from those results. Many of the partners are the same, and it also takes smart grid technologies at the grid edges, but implements those and really goes into testing and deploying of new market and market mechanisms. But before I really jump into the results and the technical solutions of those projects, I want to have a short summary of the challenges for the distribution grids and the DSOs. And as I saw before in some of the presentations, they are really an actor in the transition, and it's important to understand also what challenges they are facing for us when we talk about transition and about other actors in the system, but also for the researchers and the developers of solutions. We often think as a researcher that we have a solution, a technical solution for a technical issue, and that the DSO is very eager to buy that. And then we're surprised it is so difficult, and that is sometimes because we don't understand the full, the challenges that the DSOs are facing. So it starts, of course, with the very ambitious decarbonization goals, both at European level, when you think about how the Paris Agreement has been translated in different legislations, and finally the European Green Deal that wants zero emissions by 2050, and then national scenarios with ambitious targets for deployment of no loads from heating, from electric vehicles, also from electrification of the industry. And many of those new loads will be deployed at a distribution system. So we predict, especially in the next 5 to 10 years, a large impact on the distribution grids and a strong need for new technical requirements. So increasing amount of renewables will, of course, have distinct impacts on the grid and require new solutions. But also, if you look, for example, at electric vehicles, the growth in load of that source is much higher than we even anticipated at the beginning of the project. And if you look at climate goals or energy goals that are not even national but come from the local communities or the cities, they can be even more ambitious and have more impact on the local grids. So it is important to realize that we are working on those solutions, and that is also one of the things that the United Grid worked on. And providing this kind of solutions and securing network planning and development, operation and maintenance is, of course, the core activity of the DSO. So his core activity, as it is regulated, is to manage the grid and also, in a certain extent, provide some services to network users. In the past, this was mainly like connecting users and access to information. Previously, this was, for example, about maintenance. But then with the third electricity package, a whole new set of services with the smart metering. New data was available on the grid, and the DSO also had to manage that. And now with the winter package and the new electricity market regulation and directive, we see a whole new set of roles emerging for the DSO. So this package has a focus on consumers, new loads, and improved flexibility, with an important role for the DSO. He has to provide transparency on the planned investments through network development plans, and be able to cost efficiently integrate those new loads and be a neutral market facilitator. But taking up this new role is a new aspect for the DSO, and it also demands for new investments that focus much more on operational practices instead of building new lines, and that is not always easy in the existing income frameworks for the DSOs. It requires the DSO to make new choices in planning and operation of the grid, and to develop new services. And on top of that, it is not only regulation only that pushes for new services and activities. It is sometimes innovation itself that moves forward at a very high speed. So it's sometimes called disruptive innovation. And in the past, we have seen that with the introduction of PV, how quick the growth of PV has had an impact on the system. And it's difficult for stakeholders to keep up the pace of this innovation and to anticipate the necessary infrastructure and market arrangements. But especially for the DSO, it is hard because there is so little room for innovation. We see that the markets don't follow at the same speed as the innovation and the anticipated low growth. And also that handling these new uncertainties, for example, in new loads, but also environmental regulation, handling risk, and the need for operational expenditure is not something that the DSO is used to take into account. So I'm not saying that it's only about regulation. Of course, there is a need for adapted regulation to allow investment in innovation. But what I want to focus on here also, if we look at the DSO as an actor, is that it might be necessary to also look at new ways of operating the grid and new activities DSO could explore. And sometimes it's mentioned that the DSO could expand his work to new gray zones of DSO's activities that were not part of his core activities. For example, think about those the whole set of data. It's not only end user data, which is of course protected, but also grid data, increasing amounts of grid data that could provide additional services for maybe other DSOs or aggregators. The way to engage with customers and communicate with them opens new possibilities. And then within the boundaries of the regulation, looking at what storage and charging infrastructure services could be foreseen. That all are activities that could be explored. And sometimes it's even mentioned that if the DSO doesn't keep up with the pace of the innovation, he gets into the DSO death spiral where, for example, homeowners invest in PV and batteries and disconnect from the grid, making the grid costs even higher and to be shared by less people, so that more and more people disconnect, and the grid becomes obsolete in the end. So this is not a future that we anticipate. So when we see that this power system is evolving to this more cyber physical energy system, the DSO also has to position himself in this system. And especially if you see what evolutions are possible and what smart solutions are being developed also on the lower voltage levels based on new software networks and communication protocols, and how the affordability of computing power has opened new possibilities on these lower voltage levels. we see that the DSO has to modernize in a way that was previously not practical or cost effective. So instead of an asset-centric company, he becomes more data-centric, which gives him a number of advantages, increased efficiency and productivity, but also new worries to take into account, for example, security, privacy risks. We went into great detail on those in the United Grid project, but that also means he has to change his organizational structure, maybe hire new people, hire new competences that can support the change in organizational structure. And then finally, that last challenge that maybe there is a need to create more DSO agency in transitioning environments. So we don't need to see the DSO always as a very static and innovation-resistant actor of the system. He has a central role in the system, and it is important to see what opportunities exist and how benefits can be created in this transition. So we worked also in the project on how to create that agency for the DSOs. Now, the central part of the United Grid solution, like I said, is a technical solution. It's an advanced distribution management system for the distribution grids. It provides the DSOs with numerous services to ensure the security of the electrical grid and to improve the quality of energy supply, while coping with the increased complexity and challenges that I mentioned before. So it is based on a node system, a central node, and several distributed nodes that that embeds certain services. And these tools can be used to optimize the network supervision and control. So the central toolbox is connected to the DSO SCADA system, and then the cross-platform makes the link to these new loads on the web, and the whole system is used to better monitor and operate the network and to increase control and protection. So yeah, the work after 3.5 years encompasses 12 advanced functionalities. I won't go into the detail of all of them, but all of them can be implemented in the central toolbox. But I will just say something about the 4 most important functionalities, let's say, so because they have a higher TRL level, so close to market adoption. And it gives you also an insight on what these kind of toolboxes can do. So the renewable forecasting tool helps the DSO to better balance supply and demand in situations with high amounts of renewables. And it consists of different modules: a day-ahead forecasting based on meteorological data, short-time forecasting based on satellite images, and a very short-term forecasting based on a sky camera that was developed in this project and also tested in the demo sites. So the next one is the congestion forecasting tool, which is based on load forecasts and generation forecasts, and it's an algorithm that can forecast congestion and voltage deviations. And this is, of course, an important input on for congestion management and to use flexibility in an optimized way. The advanced measurement solution is a combination of intelligent sensors that have GPS synchronized measurements and include both real-time data and historical data. So this can be used for direct adaptive control of the network, but also for grid analytics and to get insights in the grid. And this is connected to an open development platform to integrate new smart grid algorithms. And the distributed state estimator is an advanced functionality which is mainly using the topological information from the network and measurements in the field to provide a precise network condition at a given time. So these are examples of the functionalities that were developed within United Grid and that solve a certain need that is existing already or that we foresee in the next 10 years. But like I said before, implementing this solution comes within this larger complexity of the DSO grids. So we developed also some pathways for not only for investing in this kind of solution, but in general for implementing innovation into the grids. And aligned with that, developed new market models and business opportunities. So that is technical solutions can also provide support for the new potential services that the DSO could give. We also had a task on cost-reflective tariff structures for the DSO and how different tariffs can have an impact on the income of the DSO. And finally, in the project, we organized some transition workshops, which is probably interesting for the topic of today, to support also the DSO to cope with those challenges and make him an enabler instead of a resistor to change of the transition, with the aim of just having a faster transition. So we organized with different people from the DSO organization action-oriented transition workshops, where we looked into different aspects, so not only technical, market, and organizational, but also social aspects. And we had some really interesting results on how they see their future role, their relationship with other stakeholders in the systems, the competence that are required, and also put that on different time frames. And it's not because the DSO has maybe a difficulty now to connect to individual end users that this is not something that he sees in the longer term, while he might be more interested at the moment to have closer relationships with, for example, industries that develop very fast and have a need for electrification of the system. Then the next project, FlexiGrid project. I see I have to be a bit fast to stay in time. I'll just say very quickly, this builds upon the experiences from United Grid and another project called FED. It's not the same FED that was mentioned before as a Danish project. This is a fossil-free energy district project. So it will use some of the IT solutions, adapt them, and also implement them in different market structures, a peer-to-pool, a peer-to-peer, and a self-adaptive market, and mainly for solving congestion. And what the project has done until now, I think it has been going on for a year and a half or something, or 2 years, is very much looking at the barriers for implementing innovative local market solutions and also the design aspects for local markets. And we see very much difficulties in finding the right size of the market, defining the new roles, the system interaction, but also, this was mentioned before, quantifying the real value and the cost of flexibility. So this is an ongoing process of the flexibility project. So I had very little time to go into the details, but I really invite you to look at the United Grid website to look at the recorded webinars from the last weeks and learn more about the technical solutions, and also follow FlexiGrid through the website or the newsletter to see what will be happening there. So thanks, and I'm looking forward, if we still have time, to the discussion.
So yes, Claire from Denmark to you. I'm delighted to be here with you presenting the Cool Data project at this ISGAN seminar. Just a little bit of a disclaimer. We started the project in the late 2020s, so we do not have yet any sound and robust results to present to you. But at least this presentation is intended as a pitch to stress that the digital sector has tremendous potential for decarbonization. But even more than that, it has potential to accelerate the deep decarbonization in energy systems, and especially electricity, and the heat system, and all that building on the infrastructure brought by the smart grid. So actually, this project is a good example of what we do today in Denmark to go one step forward and to extend the possibilities, the smart integration of renewables and the flexibilities that have come to life with the smart grid, and to extend it to more flexibility in other in other sectors of the economy. So here in this case, the digital sector. So as the title indicates, we look into the smart integration of data centers in the energy sector. So why do we say that it is smart? Well, because the project heavily relies on advanced management system to control and optimize energy flows, so that we want to minimize the carbon footprint and also the cost to operate data centers. And why integrated? Well, because actually data centers occupy a very interesting spot right in the middle between electricity and heat. So it is very much at the interface between those two sectors, where electricity can be used or is used for cooling the servers, and it can serve flexibility services for the electricity system. On the other end of the data centers, the waste heat generated by the servers and potentially produced from decarbonized electricity can be utilized as a supply source, as a decarbonized supply source in district heating, and serve the heat supply in the neighboring buildings. So in other words, very briefly on this one, the project goes against this silo thinking of data centers. We no longer see the data center as one actor of the digital sector, but rather as a flexible and integrated module across systems. So we take into account all of the energy features in data centers, the energy flows, inflows, outflows, and we build bridges across systems. So why does it matter? For many reasons, actually. First of all, the ICT sector today represents 2% of global CO2 emissions, and in 5 years' time, the digital sector, the data centers market is expected to double. So this is a very fast increase, and it's especially important for Denmark and countries in the Nordics, generally speaking, because they stand out as hotspots for future investment and future location data centers. Denmark ranks first in terms of location, and the rest of the Nordic countries are among the top 6 countries. And this is mostly due to low electricity prices, to low carbon intensity in the electricity, and to secure and robust energy infrastructures, among others criteria. Also, what we observe when we're looking at this sector is that during the past decade, tremendous energy efficiency gains have been achieved in data centers, but they've been mostly achieved by innovation in the IT equipment and components. But the problem is those incremental gains are, let's say, increasing at a decreasing rate. So it is more and more costly to obtain energy efficiency with the IT system. But on the bright side, the cooling system in data centers has been mostly overlooked, even though it represents about 40% of the energy needs in data centers. So here is a potential. And what is very nice with this potential is that cooling, gathers a lot of thermal characteristics to play a flexible role. Finally, we've been talking a lot, especially in Denmark, we've been talking a lot about the promises of upcoming hyperscale, super modern data centers from Google or Facebook or some other big players such as this. But here again, small and medium scale data centers are mostly overlooked. And to us, those small and medium scale data centers are extremely exciting because they are mostly located in urban areas. And in Denmark and in most Nordic countries, those urban areas are also the ones being supplied by district heating. So those small and medium scale data centers are our keys to integrated players. So what do we do in the Cool Data project? Now let's dive a little bit into this research project. We do several things. We build a modular cooling system. So basically we use a portfolio of efficient cooling equipment, and we develop an advanced storage solution that uses using phase change material. We do this at Denmark Technical Universities. We're right now building a prototype. So of course the idea was this storage unit is to store electricity when it is produced by wind, and to utilize it on a later period to cool the servers down. Another activity that we do is we developed this AI-based controlling system. So basically, algorithm and smart controllers to connect the cooling equipment and the storage, and so that the modular, the entire cooling solution responds to the reliability requirements in data centers that are pretty high in terms of security. And of course, that minimizes both the cost for the data center operator and the CO2 emission of the facility. At the end, the project will integrate this modular cooling solution to a test case. I just present them very briefly here. GEV is a district heating operator here in Denmark, and Navier is the air traffic controller of the Copenhagen airport, also very much interested to optimize its cooling costs. Finally, yes, the idea is to assess the economic and environmental gain of scaling up of this solution at the so both in Denmark and also in some handpicked selected export countries with high potential. And of course, when we assess this, the efficiency gains of this smart modular solution, we look into energy efficiency in the cooling equipment, and of course on the flexibility potential, on excess heat utilization, especially coming from decarbonized energy sources, and in CO2 reduction. When we look into the business potential, we pay a great deal of attention to, of course, figure out how much the data center operator can make out of the solution, but also we want to estimate the distribution of those gains across the electricity and heat systems. So we very much use this systemic and holistic view when we consider those three ICT and energy sectors. So yes, that's what we do. And at the moment, as I said, we're developing the prototype, and we're
this is just to remind you, you are 10 minutes, so you know.
Wonderful. Thank you, Thibaut. Perfect. So we're developing the prototype, and we are developing the algorithm at the moment, especially working very closely with Navier, the air traffic controller. And we are building the model to represent the integration of data centers to the energy systems. Now, I'd like to draw your attention on a report that will be published in the coming days. And in this report, we'll make the overview of the incentive framework provided by current key performance analysis in data centers. This is very important to have the right set of performance of indicators to have a better idea of what is the consumption. How efficient the energy consumption is in data centers and how flexible they can be and all that. So basically in this report, we explain why current indicators as provided by the standardization bodies are fairly limited and even sometimes hinder ambitious action from this sector to cut their carbon emissions. And we suggest new indicators that very much build on this concept of integrated data centers. So we come up with new indicators that basically fully allow to capture the benefits of integrated, flexible, using heat waste recovery data centers. And of course, we also develop a few recommendations to support a better alignment between the relevant authorities and the sector in order to set up ambitious binding targets in terms of energy efficiency and flexibility and so on. Extremely briefly, the way we did it, we measured the gap. So what you can see here in the table, in the blue table, are the indicators provided by the standardization bodies that apply to most data centers. And we just figure out what was the gap in terms of information collected and for the implementation in the future of high impact targets. So what stands out is that first, energy efficiency, at least for the entire data center, not necessarily for the cooling system, is very well captured by the indicators, by many of the indicators. What we see as well is that there is quite some room for improvement to get a detailed view of the data center's efforts in renewable energy sources, on the use of renewables, and on its CO2 cuts. And finally, flexibility is almost entirely not considered at all. And this is, to our belief, a big shortcomings of those current indicators. Also, in a more transversal way, almost all of those indicators target the entire data centers and do not allow a specific view on the cooling subsystem. We have defined 8 KPIs. Please don't pay attention to this table. I know it is very small, and if you're interested, you can always dive into the report. But very briefly, on the bright side, all those new indicators can easily build on the existing indicators, either through marginal modification of their scope, so targeting the cooling subsystem, and time resolution, but also in better defining the boundaries of data centers and through merging of different indicators, especially when we want to connect decarbonized electricity to decarbonized heat waste recovery. Again, on the other bright side, most of those indicators simply rely on adapted metering at the subsystem and net metering, meaning that the hardware requirement for whatever data center is not so expensive to obtain. That being said, the more flexible we want to be, the more flexibility oriented the indicator is, the higher the requirement for advanced data management that is likely to be tailored to specific server rooms in order to facilitate automation and control and to synchronize exogenous data such as the air temperature and the carbon intensity of the electricity. This is going to be my very last one. As a way forward, we see that what is clear that indicators today are in themselves, they are tools that are only useful if they can drive sustainable choices, investment and operation choices in data centers. But as of today, there is a real lack of a supportive framework to make binding targets, to make those indicators useful. So what we consider as appropriate is to implement transparency mechanisms on the detailed data collection. This should come as a priority. This should be accessible by the relevant authorities for them to monitor effort, to perform performance benchmark, and to set binding targets that are aligned with our objectives. And that was it for me. Thank you very much. That was the Cool Data project, and you can hear more on our webpage.
Thank you very much to the organizers for the invitation. I'm with the Eindhoven University of Technology, and I would like to talk to you about a community-based virtual power plant. I would like to make 3 points. Number one is that energy system is in transition. I would like to argue that community-based virtual power plant can serve an accelerator of this transition, and then discuss a few implications, because it's not so easy. I think you will all agree with me that we are really moving away from this very centralized fossil fuel based one directional flow type of electricity system towards more mixed, where intermittent renewables play an important role also in the lower voltage levels. And of course, we all know that it leads to a number of grid problems. because copper is expensive, because putting cables in the ground is expensive, grid operators are looking for different ways, and flexibility is widely recognized as a way to deal with the problem. And there is a search for the best ways, best markets in which this flexibility can be provided. And as a transition scholar, I'm using the social technical perspective. There are different ways to talk about this, but one message from this is that I see technology as being enacted by actors, so it does not have any utility. It's really used by the actors, and it very much depends on who is using this technology. A second point, which we are also making in our newest paper, is that ICT developments, the digitalization process that is unfolding together with increased use of renewables, decentralization process, and so on, is a really different type of technology, because even though it creates, of course, new problems, but it also facilitates another step in energy transition. So I see that actors make use of ICT in order to put a foot in their door of this change. So when you look at the very dominant way of dealing with things is the system, the incumbent actors are using ICT for the aggregation of the distributed energy resources in order to deal with those problems that are appearing in the system. So this virtual power plant is a software-based solution that brings all these DAREs together, and because it acts as a single entity, we are talking about power plant, and it allows the actors to play new roles. When we were starting this project, we did a very quick screen of the system. We just wanted to see whether there are other projects VPP oriented. There were many. We finished the analysis in the early 2019, but this bar should be much higher. There are many on the market, so in that sense, VPP is nothing new. They are deployed. They are deployed at different scales. But what's very interesting is that most of these projects have been initiated in a very top-down way, with really specific aim to help the grid, to stabilize the grid, to manage congestion. Asset ownership, of course, was mixed, because people are owning the PVs, but the whole algorithm, the ICT platform, was provided by the incumbent actors. But prosumers were really, depending on the project, very selectively recompensated and had totally no decisive power. Community needs mostly assumed very economic and individual focus. But when you look at all these energy communities, they are really mushrooming, not only in Europe, but I think all over the world. You realize that these communities don't really have objective of balancing the grid or dealing with congestion as the first thing on their list. They just want to do something good for the renewables, for the energy transition. They want to have some, of course, money back. So self-consumption is relevant, but they also want to be independent from the system, independent in a sense of not getting energy from the grid. So in that sense, it's the community-driven virtual power plant facilitates communities to move to not only really consume and generate energy at individual or collective level, but really also participate in the management of system. So a couple of years, we have acquired from Interreg Northwest Europe a project where we propose now we want to flip this logic, and we want to see, can there be a virtual power plant that is really motivated by the communities? But of course, it was really very important to clarify what we mean by community-based. And there's a lot in the literature. We screened about 2,500 different publications, and we have also worked in this project. So we had spot-on sort of lessons with regards to what is community. Is to people a community? Is a street a community? When do we say that there is a community energy or community project? So from this research, I think what was profoundly coming is that it's a community-based when it is driven by the community needs and motivations, and that this is the community that is really deciding about how they organize themselves, how they distribute risks and benefits, how they engage people, how they include people who, for example, don't have money. One of the community I worked with has set up a revolving fund through which they funded a number of projects in their village for people who did not have the funds and couldn't get the loan. So in that sense, community logic is something different than what you sometimes see happening out there when policymakers come sometimes to us researchers asking us, okay, so there is this wind farm and please help us involve people in this. It's community logic is different than the logic that many projects are being set right now. So in order to really define the community-based virtual power plant, of course, you need the technology, but I'm a social scientist, so I'm interested in people, and this is also a social technical innovation. We try to argue that the technology has to serve people. We don't start with the technology. And of course, you need some basic distributed generation, controllable loads, energy storage. Of course, if you have everything in your community, that's great, but it doesn't mean that you cannot start if you only have distributed generation. But in order,
10 minutes now.
Okay, so in order to really enact it, there has to be a process in the community. There has to be a decision-making organization, and then we can think about, okay, how do we want to control it? How is this energy management system serving what we want really? And what roles can we play in the market? So with this definition, you can see that there are some necessary elements and the ones that you can choose from, which means that this definition is broad enough that allows to encompass different types of communities, but also sees the specific contextuality of them. This is how we went through the process in Luna, and I once more want to emphasize that we started from the community, from what their values are, what they want. And that was translated into activities, and only then we defined the platform. And some partners chose for an open platform to be able to really fully have power over it, but some did not have those skills, so they delegated it. And such a social technical innovation, if you like, it can allow communities play a much more important role in the energy system. Of course, when you look at it now, it's very limited because of the fixed price and fixed tariff. But in the future market, it is possible. We worked with Youssef on this picture to show that there is some sort of implicit flexibility value chain, and also the communities can provide these services through an aggregator to other parties on the market. And if the communities are skilled enough, if they have the professionalization levels, they can, of course, do many things themselves. They don't need an ESCO. They can become an ESCO. They can supply for themselves, and they are suppliers. They can also take on the role of the aggregator, or even if they have some grid in their jurisdiction, they can even play a role of the DSO. And of course, everyone knows we have this winter package, which is supposed to make more space for these communities. So we looked at these implicit flexibility services and explicit flexibility services. We did a screen of all the regulations specifically to look how it is regulated. It is not. That's my message from this slide. And we have also did some little calculations for one of the communities, just to see what is really possible. And you can see that it's only time of use that's possible. Because in the Netherlands, the communities can negotiate the price at the day-ahead market. The peak shaving is possible, but then a community would have to be considered by a DSO like as a microgrid. But CVPP is essentially not a microgrid because every household is connected to the grid. And self-balancing is possible, but there's no value in it because we have net metering. So yeah, the grid is used as a never-ending battery. So in this project, we have shown that if we are serious about fair energy transition, where we want citizens and communities participate in it, then we have to make space for it. We showed that this works. Technology works. Communities are ready. We have developed a model to help new communities set up and configure their own CVPPs. It's in huge demand. RESCOP EU is using it right now, putting it in their portfolio. We are supervising a number of new communities to help them set it up. But my message is we still have a lot of work to do, because the system is still favoring the incumbency, professionalization, high levels of liquidity, and it is on the communities to catch up and adjust to the system, not the other way around. While if we really talk about transition, then the give and take has to be on both sides. Thank you very much. More information, of course, if you Google CVPP, you will get a lot of documents and also video seminars. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Anna, for this presentation. So we have finished with the presentations right now, and I'll ask everyone in the panelists to turn on their camera and microphone so we can be able to go together. Yes. So I will start with a few questions we have received through the chat, and then we can move on to the panel discussion that Klaus will moderate instead of me. So first off, Rasgar received a question regarding your presentation. Could you elaborate on why avoiding dam regulation is important?
So basically, if you have the renewables, because what happens now, sometimes you have spare generations, right? And if you have enough data, you can basically avoid it, because this is sometimes it's also a waste of generation that we could overcome by having data and more observability on the network. All right, very well.
And now we still have about 5 minutes for the questions we should ask. To Claire, what are the key players involved in ensuring that data centers can provide flexibility?
Yes, thank you for the question. Well, I think the key players are just the same as with any industrial player. As long as there is a profit to be made out of flexibility service, and that it covers the cost of installing whatever flexible equipment, then actors may consider it. I just want to stress that in the case of data centers, the supply of electricity is so its quality is so critical that this is probably something that flexibility suppliers should take into account to tailor an offer that is adequate to their needs.
Well, actually, it's a question more focused on the panel discussion itself that comes afterwards. So I think I'll just leave the floor to Klaus Skutte and move on to the panel discussion right away. Klaus?
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Thibaut. It's a pleasure for me to moderate the panel discussion. I will raise one or two issues, questions, and then ask one or two of you to elaborate. But if any other in the panel would like to add something, then please raise your hand or just shout out loudly. I actually had the first one to Klaus, but maybe I'll ask it to Claire then, and then to Joni as well. It's about investment and regulation. I think many EU efforts are made to improve the framework condition of flexibility actors like aggregators. But most often the investment decision in the flexibility access are happening for other reasons. So first, Claire, in your study or your previous studies, how can regulators or investors in the energy sector enhance the timely investments, for example, in industry or district heating, so that the interaction with the energy market is factored into a business case with the investment, where the investment is taking place and not as an add-on to at some later stage. Could you please elaborate on that?
Yes, thank you, Klaus, for this question. That I was not expecting, a bit far away from the current research at the moment, but that's very nice. That was a long one. So basically, you're asking about what regulatory frameworks could enable investment into flexibility and serve the whole setup, right? Yes. Well, I think that, and I know that you guys at Nordic Energy Research, you're interested into the topic, right? One important part of what we're doing today in this cool data project that I presented was that we again, the scope that we utilize to see an object or a flexible actor or whatever is extremely important to define the state of play. For instance, in this presentation, I started to explain the concept of integrated data centers, but basically this concept could be applied to pretty much anything that can serve services that go beyond their core activities, such as here flexibility and so on and so forth. And I think that maybe that's what you're interested to hear here is how can authorities and regulatory frameworks actually, point toward this more new scopes that highlight those kind of synergy effects at the interface across sectors and support more flexibility or more, high value added energy services. I think that we've done a lot, quite great deal of work on regulation around taxes, around tariffs that were made in a world not thinking about the challenges that we have today, but could more or less easily be modified to support flexibility signal and to support demand response.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. And Joey, the same question for you, but you took departure in this United Grid project you have. So just to rephrase the question a little bit, how can the business case be improved for the system operator, like the DSO, for example, so that they choose to invest in flexibility when they are revamping the grid? I mean, how do they take that into account? How can we make sure that they also invest in make business cases in the grid development?
I'm not sure what you mean with investing in flexibility, since, well, the grid operator has to not invest in it himself, but provide that be the operator that allows flexibility to be used in the grid. And I think in that sense, what is important for the grid operator is to give clear signals also what kind of flexibility is needed, and has to compare flexibility solutions to other solutions, like investments in grid enforcement or storage solutions, and not take it for granted that maybe flexibility is the best solution everywhere. So having adapted strategies for grid planning and having a clear message about where investments might be needed in flexibility would be a first step, and that could also lead then to incentives for private investments, but then on specific strategic network locations rather than just random incentivizing investments in flexibility.
Okay, thank you. Any other from the panel who would like to comment on investments and how we enforce that with regulation?
Well, I have a related questions to the DSO. I'm just wondering, in terms of all these functions that DSOs need to do in the future, and also the investments that need to sort of incentivize, are many DSOs big enough? Should we have a merger of organizational sort of mergers? I guess some DSOs are actually quite small.
I don't know.
Yeah, that was to you, Joni. Yes.
Okay. Well, in United Grid, we look well, the diversity among DSOs is enormous, and it makes it also so difficult to develop regulation or rules, because a large commercial DSO is completely different than a smaller one that has, for example, very close relationships to the end users. And in Sweden, we have even like community-owned DSOs that are sorry. Even more closely related to the end users. So I don't know if there's a better or a worse, if they should merge or even split. I just see they need different kinds of solutions. The larger ones, they are already they have the money and the possibilities to already invest in new solutions, and they have their own researchers to develop these, while the smaller ones don't have the means, but might be much more interested in engaging, for example, in the communities. So I think it's just the complexity of all these different DSOs that is hard to grasp. Yes.
I think it's Claire first, and then Anna and Klaus.
Yeah, I would like just quickly I think I better understood your question when you rephrased it to Joni, actually. How can authorities facilitate more flexibility on the part of DSOs? I think there is a big issue probably today that comes from historical reasons and the way regulation and cost recovery in network industries is made. And so basically more than 90% of those networks are high capital cost infrastructure. This is the definition of a network. And the cost recovery enabled by regulatory agencies is based on this high fixed costs, low operation costs. The problem is the more we go flexible, the more we need to put an emphasis, the more we need to build an adequation between revenue of networks and low capital cost activities. So long story short, it means how can we depart a little from the traditional cost plus regulation based on the regulated asset based to a more OPEX or performance based regulations. I think that the tools exist. We know them, regulators know them, but they are not utilized enough.
Anna, did you have a comment?
Yes, on this, from a very bottom-up community perspective, and if we are really talking, I think if we are really talking about a transition and we are serious about that, then I think one is that the jury's still out. We don't know how these systems will look like. And, if you discuss that we need bigger DSOs and support them how to deal with all the problems, then I think we are throwing a baby with the bathwater, because usually these processes are highly negotiated in society, and I think DSOs have to really also pick up their role and rethink the way they operate. And from our experience, in Belgium, there's just one DSO, and it's simply impossible to talk to them. We can't do anything with them. But in the Netherlands, there are 8 or 9, and some of them are a little bit more open to collaborate with communities and consider different business models. So I think the more the more chances for a change, really.
I would have 2 points. The first point, and Joni also mentioned that for Sweden, that there are smaller DSOs or even utilities still in the conventional way. We know from the United States that there are even thousands of those small communities in remote areas. And from a study that I was told about, the main challenge there is that Siemens, for example, who wanted to sell them smart grids, they were not able to talk to each other because that's just normal people that manage those grids. In that sense, it is more a question of knowledge and then maybe also of size for smart grids. The other point is that in Europe, the European Commission quite clearly says to the DSOs, if you need copper, you get the copper. Which is for me always the question: why are we talking about flexibility that should be provided to the distribution system operator, or should they just more or less, so to say, build more highways if they're allowed to, and if it's not an environmental threat or otherwise a problem, and focus on other kinds of flexibilities where how to move the renewable resources to the right place. So more rather a question of energy logistics than of physical limitation, flexibility services for physical limitations.
More comments?
I do have a few questions actually, but I'll ask two. One to Anna. I mean, are these, in your experience, are these energy communities building up their skills and capacities to engage with flexibility and other sort of more advanced roles in the energy system? And how can that skill development be promoted?
Yes, that's a good point. One is that they indeed, these organized communities are usually driven by someone charismatic, someone who worked at energy utility, and they know how the business works. So they push the whole initiative, which is really great. But what we are doing, we are also training the energy regisseurs, or how you call them, the energy mentors that are by default set by the municipalities, exactly for this purpose, to support the energy communities. Plus, if the energy community is clever enough and they have these revolving funds, they can also hire extra capacity. So, but as long as the community is deciding about that, then it's all fine. It's not a sort of a top-down decision of someone else. We will do it for you. No, it's the community that delegates the job, and there are many possibilities, but it is one of the obstacles. I agree.
Can I ask you quickly, Anna, what is a revolving fund?
It's simply an internal fund that is, so one of the communities won a little bit of money, and they simply invested it in the fund, which is operating on the market, and it gets some, percentage revenues, and from that they have sort of growing amount of funds that they can make use of. And because it's in the jurisdiction of the community, not the bank, then there's decision making about how you lend it, to whom, and on which percentage within the community, which in many cases solves the problem.
It's very interesting.
Yes.
I think Joni wants to ask something.
Yes, you mentioned the top-down approach as a preferable governance model, almost, at least for the participants. I think in Sweden there are not so many examples, but I see both models. So bottom-up model of energy communities coming from the community, but equally well top-down approaches where indeed a charismatic person from either the city or the city council, or even the DSO, as we sometimes see, promotes the development of these local energy communities. Yeah. Do you see, is that for you the wrong way?
No, I have to clarify. So this charismatic person is a member of the village, of the community, but he is just rich enough not to work anymore and, get busy with the community. So it's not really top down. It's very bottom up. So the way how I work is very bottom up, but,
Sorry, that's what I meant.
Yeah, it's still, the jury is still out. We don't know how the future system will look like. It can be a combination of different things. But what I want to argue for is that we don't have to expect that these citizens and communities have to do the hard job. Also, these incumbents, they have to really seriously, like you said yourself, they have to rethink their role and how do we want to have the system of the future organized.
I think we can maybe go on 5 minutes. People can log out if they have to go home. But if the panel is okay, we can stay 5 minutes. Do you have any more questions, Klaus, for our panel, or should we open it up?
Yeah, but you actually had a second one, I heard. So I have some, but if you have a second one, then it's fine.
I can ask Klaus Kubesco. please. You know, you mentioned these regulatory experiments, and you mentioned all these different markets on your slide. So, for which markets do you think these regulatory sandbox experiments are the most important? Where should we focus these experiments?
Well, I think if you talk about markets, then it's a completely new dimension that hasn't been really touched so far. So, in the sense of creating an institution of a certain market, so far it's more about tariff models, flexibility, so flexible tariffs, which are more related to the relation between the supplier and the end user, and the end user then is not really playing on the market, so to say. So it's more there. It's more, and this is also my point regarding institutions. I think it's not only about markets; it's also about how to organize this peer-to-peer exchange. What Anna was talking about, that might become much more important as a kind of contractual relation, maybe with smart, with blockchain and smart contracts and all that might be technologically facilitated. But it's a different kind. So I think we have to get away of only thinking in terms of markets. And my point there was also, if we talk about markets, we clearly have to say which kind of markets are we talking about and who's involved there.
Can I ask you one more question then, Klaus? So this institution set up, what kind of stakeholder interaction, arrangement, or partnership do you see that exist that can ensure this appropriate and timely change in regulation? And can it be copied from where you see it in one country or in a sandbox or whatever to other places? Can you give some cases?
Yeah, if I understand it correctly, it's more about those who set the framing for the experiments.
Yeah.
Well, there are different models. I mean, for example, in UK and in Italy, the regulatory body has some kind of mission of also supporting energy transition. So they are rather autonomous. They just have calls. But in Austria, for example, we have the situation that even in order to be able to have this kind of grant agreements, you have to include the lawmakers. And we did this, for example, in the first phase of the Austrian program, Energiefreiraum, where we were asked a project, we got a project that was intended to organize the stakeholder process. And not only those innovators, but also the lawmakers were involved, the regulatory bodies were involved, and the funding agency was involved, and the ministry in charge of innovation. So this kind of interactions are necessary, really necessary, and that makes it also so difficult. And yeah, Anna also mentioned it needs some kind of caretaker who has this mission to push forward. And that's the less actors are involved, better it works.
I was just wondering, maybe actually the DSO seems to be a very central player here, and a very difficult one too, in different ways actually. So do we know, maybe it's a question to you, Joni, do we know enough about these DSOs? Should we do more research on DSOs as an actor in this transition? And also actually more sort of actively try to motivate or work with DSOs to be, it seems some of them need to be more open to change than others. And maybe also to Raska, the technologies that you develop and the systems you develop, how do you work with DSOs in that development? Are they an important player here?
Yes, actually they are quite crucial to us, but it's not so DSOs are only one part of the equation for us, right? So if I'm just talking in terms of the sensors, the installment, the equipment we need to install in their premises, but also the end users. But one of the things that we try and look into now is to give them this possibility of having more observability and monitoring of their grid in low voltage grids. And it becomes more and more evident that their role becomes even more crucial when we have more EVs integrated, and the peak times are shifting, throughout the day. Yeah, absolutely.
And Joni, do we know enough about DSOs now after your project?
I got a very interesting comparison of one of the DSOs that we've worked with, and you have to be a Swedish DSO to make that comparison. He compared it to an ice hockey stick, where you have been doing the same thing for a long time, and then you see the curve, and you see the radical change in the future, but we are still in that curve, and it's very unclear, and a lot is happening. That's also what I tried to explain in the presentation, that the challenges are on so many levels. So that is actually why during this project we decided to initiate those transition workshops with colleagues that I have at RISE that are from the Transition Lab. And based on these experiences and other experiences, they're now starting up also a competence platform for this kind of research, because I don't think I think there's still a lot to do there, and for the benefit of the DSOs, but also for the benefit of the other actors in the system. So I don't think we are there yet.
Can I ask a question related to this? So isn't it so that flexibility is organized via the aggregator and not DSO, actually? I don't know how it's in Denmark, actually, but isn't it the aggregator that is collecting all the different flexible services and flexibility and sells it to different partners in the market? So then, therefore, this is where the attention should go into organization of the business model that's workable for different partners. Well, how do you feel about that?
Well, please start.
Yeah, so what I could say from our experience and also from the project, and we collaborate with DSOs, that you are absolutely right here, because at the end, the DSO, they only care about at least for the time being, security of supply. That's their primary reason. But of course, as you say, the aggregators, so the business model should be towards the aggregators. But as soon as we shift towards local flexibility market, then there is also an opportunity for DSOs. But as we speak now, for them is more security of supply rather than making money.
Yes.
I was a little bit unsure about the way that you asked your question, actually, because technically, I mean, the DSO is not allowed legally to serve those flexibility services. It is not allowed, because of the unbundling rules and because of the directives. But actually, there are 3 gray zones that exist because they were the legal definition of those flexibility services were drafted into European texts, so we cannot change it. Now let's look forward. And those texts took place before a few things happened, technological changes happened. So there's 3 main gray zones here. One gray zone is this energy community. It is not legally defined by European texts. So there are some leeways for action for DSOs to do things here. There is a gray zone on the charging of electric cars, where legally DSOs have some room for maneuver. And also something that comes up a bit more in the recent month, it would be in the supply of flexibility services at the district level, in the coupling between electricity and local district heating grid, or those kind of things. So here there is still, I mean, the European directives and texts do not say anything about it. So this is where we should focus our efforts if we really want to rehabilitate the role of DSOs.
Okay.
To my knowledge.
Yeah, and just what we learned also from those transition workshops is what you're mentioning now, Claire, is more the technical roles. But we got some answers that came directly from the DSOs about other important roles as also being the sustainable developer for the region or the community, or having a more important communicator role. And that doesn't even have to go very far. Now, how DSOs communicate about what they are doing and the future challenges. Before, on the DSO website, you would only see how to connect to the grid, and you see already a large evolution in the way they communicate and interact with other stakeholders. So it's not only within that regulated environment that I think the role is changing, and things can move.
So I think back to you, Klaus. We're getting to 5:30 now, so
yeah, I think we're getting to the end. I think the number of attendees have been decreasing for a while. So maybe we'll go back to I don't know if it's you, Simon, or Thibaut, who will finish up the seminar or the webinar.
Well, that's. I think I'm supposed to. Yes, I saw the lab start. My apologies. There's not much to add. You can find all the content on the Unity website. It's going to be made available in a few days. The edited recording of this webinar. And that's about it for me. I just want to thank all the various participants, panelists for the presentations, and the audience for bearing with us for 2 hours. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.